Let us gather for worship with the words of Pat Uribe Lichty. We face a challenge to democracy, a challenge that calls us to hope in moments of despair, a challenge that asks us to persist in faith that we can and must make a difference. May our flaring chalice recommit us to truth in our words and our actions, that we may live as we believe people should live. I invite Pete to come forward and light our chalice. Please join with us in lighting our chalice by saying the chalice lighting words found in your order of service and displayed upon the screen. Maybe. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, for the light of truth, and for the energy of action. Thank you, Pete. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ogden. My name is Holly and I'm your worship leader today. The UU Church is a welcoming, inclusive place where diversity of thought is encouraged, sought, and appreciated. It doesn't matter who you love or how you identify yourself. We come here because we want to think for ourselves and explore with others. We ask questions, value the exchange of ideas, and the depth that can come from being in community. If you're new here today, welcome. Thanks for coming. Please fill in a newcomer card in the pews and put it in the offering basket when it comes by later. And please stay and chat with us after the service. If you're joining us online, please fill out the newcomer card online. Last week, we gathered for the launch of UU the Vote and committed to our participation this year as a Good Trouble congregation. You'll hear more about that later in the service. We are thrilled to be joined today by Representative Rosemary Lesser. Rosemary will inspire us toward our congregation-wide commitment to work for democracy in Ogden and beyond. If you haven't already, please put your phones on silent. We are so glad each and everyone are here, and we welcome you.
When the Spirit says do. That's 10:24. And on the action words for this verse we'll do, you got to do, you got to rise, you got to shout, and then back to you got to do at the end.
do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you've got to do, oh Lord, you've got to do when the Spirit says do. Spirit says do, 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 Spirit says do. Amen.
This year, as part of our efforts to you the vote, we have committed to being a good trouble congregation. As our minister, Kristen, reminded us last month, the term good trouble, of course, comes to us from the late Representative John Lewis, who was an activist his entire life. Lewis was a civil rights leader when he was in his 20s, up front during the infamous attempted march over the bridge on Bloody Sunday. Keynote speaker at the historic March on Washington in 1963, and later an outspoken voice for justice through his political leadership. In a speech in honor of fellow civil rights worker Rosa Parks, he said she inspired us to get in trouble, and I've been getting in trouble ever since. She inspired us to find a way to get in the way, to get what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Our Unitarian Universalist leaders describe our role as a good trouble congregation like this. Our congregation can be the embodiment of our sacred values that propel our faith and communities toward a world where all our communities thrive. This means we work collectively to get in the way of injustice and get into good trouble to build a truly multiracial democracy. From our work for marriage equality, women's suffrage, the abolition of slavery, for civil and voting rights, to advocating for a path for citizenship for immigrants, to taking on the new Jim Crow and white supremacy today, Unitarian Universalists have a legacy to carry onward.
This is hymn number 157 in the gray hymnal, 157, Step by Step, the Longest March, and we'll sing it 3 times because there's only one verse.
I'd like to invite Dylan up to introduce our guest speaker.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you very much to our guest speaker, Rosemary Lesser. Rosemary is a friend of mine and is also a representative in the House at the state legislature for Utah, which can sometimes be a difficult job, but is a job we're very, very grateful to her for serving. And she happens to be the only Democrat in the Utah State Legislature outside of Salt Lake County, which can also happen to be a difficult job, but one that we are very glad that she is willing to do for us. As Holly alluded to, we are signed up to be a good trouble congregation for this year. This year is, as you all, I hope, are very well aware, it is an election year, and it's going to be an extremely important one. And so one of the questions that we're asking as a good trouble congregation is, what can we do about it? How can we be involved? What are the opportunities to be involved, and what is going on politically, both nationally, in our state, and in our community? And I think we're probably fairly aware, at least, of what is going on with the national political environment, but there's a lot of opportunities to affect change, and ones that we might be able to have, a greater individual impact on locally, both in the state and in our county and in our city and in our communities. And so today, Rosemary is going to talk to us about more state and local politics, kind of what's going on there, what were the results and non-results of the most recent legislative session, and what some of the opportunities might be for us to get involved in important debates and important issues that are taking place locally. So with that, I will invite Rosemary to our pulpit. And again, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Great. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Dylan. And also thank you for the wonderful music. I can just imagine the spirit of John Lewis in this room as we embrace being a good troubled congregation. And as you can see, I came prepared for this with my shirt for good trouble. And, of course, Jon Stewart is known for saying the word good trouble, but let's not forget that that the next part of this is necessary trouble. And that's where I applaud everyone in this congregation for making the commitment to not only being good trouble, but recognizing that this is so important for our democracy. And so I'm actually going to talk about our legislature and some of the bills that were passed and some of the bills that were averted. And I'm going to use the framework of UU the vote, because I believe that it is really important to consider the various strategies that are being used to enhance our welfare and impair our abilities as a democracy. As I reflect on the legislative session, there was good news, because we sometimes need to uplift the good news. But we can't forget that there are so many times that we need to speak out and urge our fellow voters in the community to become engaged, because there are plenty of times that we need to say no and urge the majority to think again and consider the well-being of our community. So as you remember, in UU the vote, it's divided into 4 areas, and I think, is there going to be more discussion of UU the vote today? Ongoing. So to refresh your memory, I view you the vote. As you remember, the first and actually fundamental principle is democracy, voting rights, and electoral justice. In the Utah legislature, there has been an effort to impair voting rights by eliminating the right to have a mail-in ballot. All of us know that Utah has had mail-in ballots and automatic mail-in ballots for the past decade. And with election audits and all of this, we have been able to show that this is a very effective way to promote engagement. And in this particular session, there were efforts to eliminate mail-in ballots and only have absentee ballots as an opt-in method. We know that this is something that would really disenfranchise people. And there's a movement to try to have the only voting be in-person voting on election day. We know for workers who work unusual hours, people who are out of state, and also for people who take this democracy seriously and want to investigate the issues and investigate the candidates, having a mail-in ballot allows the opportunity for research. And this is something that must be fiercely defended. In this particular session, we were able to kill that bill. We were also able to kill the bill that required that a ballot arrive by election day. So if anybody thinks that they have control over the powers of the U.S. Postal Service, I'd like to meet them because no one does. And fortunately, good sense prevailed in this. So that was, those were two of the bills that we actually were able to defeat in this past legislative session. Unfortunately, many of these bills tend to recur, and we need to be vigilant and willing to reach out to the entire body of legislators saying that this is a vote against democracy to interfere with the ability to have mail-in voting. The next area that you, the vote, focuses on and is certainly a critically important issue in the state of Utah is climate justice. And creating climate justice is so important in the West. And this is where in this last legislative session, we had wins and we had losses. Fortunately, the recognition that the future of Utah is directly related to putting water in the Great Salt Lake has been recognized. However, the devil is in the details, and making sure that the conservation approaches that we have used with watery conservation, changes in watery methods that is used in agriculture, that actually translates to water getting into the lake. There were a few procedural bills that enhanced this, but many people in the Great Salt Lake movement, Great Salt Lake saving movement, believe that we really need a sprint in these next 5 years to save this most important saline lake. And there are organizations, and I'm going to, I will at the end talk about opportunities for intervention, but as they come to me, before I forget them, I wanted to also talk with you about groups that you can align with if the Spirit moves you, because we do have some very effective and active climate groups in our community. And in fact, Tim isn't here, but I know that he writes for the Great Salt Lake Collaborative now in his role with KSL. And I'm really grateful for the work that the Great Salt Lake News Collaborative does to spread the word. but there is, many times we don't have to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch in our actions, in our political actions. There is an organization called the Citizens Climate Lobby, and Tom Moyer and his group have a Weber County chapter that tracks these bills, has intervention, and does a great job on Capitol Hill, recognizing the unintended consequences of some of the bills that are being proposed. So with regard to the Great Salt Lake, I think we're on a forward track. It's not as fast as many people in the water space would like, but at least the intention is in a good place. Now, the place where the intentions seem to be falling apart is we have not had the will to really enact controls in the air quality space. And virtually every bill to contain greenhouse gases failed in the legislative body. Our only minor success was defeating House Bill 502, which was going to carve up the entrance to Parley's Canyon and make that another gravel pit. The Wasatch Front is geologically not a space where you want to put a lot of particulate matter, because we know how the winds blow and how the inversions occur, and adding more particulate matter to the Wasatch Front air is not the way to go. Now, sometimes there are different interests that collide that end up helping us. And there's no doubt in my mind that the application for the 2034 Olympics actually really worked in our favor in defeating 502, because everyone knows if you are going to be bringing members of the International Olympic Committee through Parley's Canyon, the last thing that we want to be seeing is that beautiful green canyon carved apart to be a gravel pit. So I think that we spoke many times on the floor of the House about the sustainability commitments that the International Olympic Committee has supported, and hope that the drive to get the Olympics will also bring along some of the climate justice initiatives that are so important for our state's future. Speaking of our state's future, our energy policies are continuing to be sometimes thwarted in the interest of supporting the coal industry. And in fact, one of the most egregious bills in my mind was maintaining and actually having the state take over the IPP plant, which is a 35-year-old coal-powered plant that was previously providing electricity mostly to the city of Los Angeles. This power plant is owned by 29 municipalities, and yet the state wanted to take it over. That vote actually came just the day after we condemned socialism and communism. To me, the irony was great that we have our flourishing socialistic alcohol stores, and we also voted to take over as a state a municipally owned power plant. But the legislature is often known for internal inconsistencies. Keep your eyes on the climate prize, because I think that Utah's future is absolutely dependent on our voices in the climate space. And I am so grateful for the vote focusing on climate justice, because that is critically important. And by the way, it's interesting because Utah, among the Western states, has the lowest percentage of renewable energy sources at 11%, compared to Washington State at 74%. Now, they have the advantage of hydroelectric power, which is really great, but we have incredible potential in solar. There is good news, and so lest you think that I am all doom and gloom, I am not. There were some reinforcements to our community renewable energy project, of which Ogden is a member. And Ogden is a member primarily from the advocacy of Council Member Angela Chaburka, who many of you may know from speaking to this congregation. She has been a leader in keeping Ogden in this community renewable energy. And as renewable energy prices continue to fall, Angela's leadership is going to be not only good for our environment, but fiscally smart for the members of the Ogden community. And so I also wanted to let you know, as we look at advocacy, that Angela Chaburka is running in House District 9. That's the adjacent district to mine. And she will also be bringing these messages of democracy and climate justice to the legislature together with me, if all goes as planned. The next element of the vote that I think is incredibly important also, and we saw more assaults on this, is the Love Resists and supporting racial and diversity justice. Many of you know that the very first few weeks of the legislature brought on initiatives to eliminate efforts to lift diverse members of our community in the education space, not only higher education, but in K-12. And the irony of this is that Weber State University has one of the best records in economic mobility and lifting individuals whose families have never had the opportunity to achieve higher education. And with that support for first generation college students, for the Women's Center, for the LGBTQ Center, for the Black Student Center, for the Hispanic Center, all of these efforts are being completely dismantled. And that is a tragedy. And also another example where the legislature feels that they know better than higher education. Now, I've been speaking about the state, but quite honestly, this particular effort to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in our state is a national movement. And for all of you who see that coming, you know that that is happening in states across the country who, through incredible financing from various super PACs, are trying to dismantle that. And Utah regards themselves as being exceptional, but I think that we should be writing our own legislation and not just taking the talking points from other states who are embarking on this. So we need to, I believe, this is a critically important component for racial justice. And what's ironic is just yesterday, Weber State won a $2 million grant from the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity to begin offering programs in Spanish for higher education, so that students for whom Spanish is their first language, they can continue their education journey in their native tongue and continue to excel. The thing that I thought was so funny is when I was having a conversation with a member of the administration, they said, this is going to be so great for returning missionaries. And I thought to myself, my goodness, Ogden is 36% Hispanic, and you're looking at the, the number of Hispanic returning missionaries. Now, I think that's wonderful if the returning missionaries can continue their language training. But let's face it, what will be transformative for our state is when 36% of our community can be educated in their native tongue and can continue to excel. So that's the third component of UU the Vote. And the last one, and the one that has caused great pain to me personally, is the section in UU the Vote called Uplift. And this action involves women's reproductive rights, bodily autonomy, disability justice, and support for our LGBTQ community. Every single year, the LGBTQ community has been under assault by the Utah legislature. And it is so unfortunate to see this and see so much time spent when we are facing such significant problems with our funding sources and looking at how we can best educate our youth. And instead, we spend the first week deciding who enters what type of bathroom and or what books a student should read. And in fact, many of you who've been following this along, again, a national trend in book banning. This one pretty much came straight out of Florida. But in this particular legislative session, it was voted upon by every member of the Weber delegation except for one. I love pushing my red no vote. In fact, it's actually become quite the thrill to see the red light go up next to my name, because I absolutely believe that the no vote is critically important. But this one on book banning involved, a real assault on the abilities of our local school boards, our librarians, and our teachers to actually just do the job for which they have been trained. We have always had a program in which our school boards and our librarians and our teachers evaluate literature for its age appropriateness. This is not a free-for-all to put, as the bill sponsor says, porn in schools. How ridiculous this messaging was. And yet right now, 10% of the school districts can control what books are read for the entirety of our state. And so for a state and for a country that values freedom, let's go back to the original messaging in UU the Vote that our democracy is critically important. And with that, I will open this to questions on how we as the people can have our voices be heard in the state that we have come to love and embrace and want the best future for all.
Real quick, we just for the people that are online. So when there's a question, if you could just quickly sort of summarize the question.
Sure.
For those joining us online, if you have a question, just put it in the chat and we'll be sure to ask Rosemary.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so there's some, you mentioned
Citizen Climate Lobby.
Are there some organizations that are not necessarily partisan organizations that you think are doing good things that you might
Right. And there absolutely are some great nonpartisan organizations related to various issues. Now, of course, the League of Women Voters is doing a great job and is a fantastic nonpartisan organization committed to advocating for the right to vote, for informing people about ways to vote, how to register, and all that. So becoming involved with the League of Women Voters for certain other single issue type things like Citizens Climate Lobby, which is again a nonpartisan group. Equality Utah does a fantastic job advocating for the LGBTQ plus community, and really has managed to, even though many of these bills are terrible, if it's imaginable, they actually make do a lot of negotiating to affect change. Let's see, the Utah Educators Association, there's a group called Utah Parents for Teachers. And this group is nonpartisan, and they're advocating for public education, which has really been under assault. I haven't spoken very much, but I'm happy to answer specific questions with regard to our spending and the voucher bills that are coming upon us. And the Utah Parents for Teachers is a nonpartisan organization that for people who are interested in supporting education. So we have O2 Utah and the Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment primarily are related to air quality. And so those are some of the larger organizations doing LGBTQ rights, democracy rights, citizen or climate rights, and education for all. So as those are our big allies in this.
Recommend that we don't have secrets like that instead of our people. You're on the outside of the districts you're talking about. It's just really like guys, you know.
You know, I absolutely understand the frustration. And I believe that these advocacy groups on Capitol Hill do a tremendous job and are a great way to funnel that in an appropriate way. Yes.
So I'm the environmental.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And we work a lot with Berkshire and the Friends of Great Salt Lake and the Utah Youth Coalition. This legislative session, we do the legal and the marches around the Capitol. And as someone who was there as a legislator, like, did you see the impact on that, like, public action? Like, what kind of stuff?
Well, first of all, Friends of the Great Salt Lake do an amazing work, and with the Great Salt Lake Initiative, I believe that continued ongoing emphasis on the Great Salt Lake is incredibly impactful for the legislature, and the high quality reporting, science-based, has really kept the pressure on to create the task force and also the Great Salt Lake News Collaborative, so that it isn't such a niche thing. It's something that virtually every news organization, whether it be Deseret News, our Salt Lake Tribune, the Standard, all of them are having reporters report on this. And I think that is incredibly impactful. Thank you. Yes?
And as you laid out, it feels like implications of it, kind of get ready to render it back to fall is kind of off. Where do you see the most room to like start to focus on? What area would most likely have to be, but
Well, first of all, I do think that every single one of those advocacy groups that I mentioned are fighting the fight for exactly what you talked about. As I said, we could go in any of those directions because many of those are under attack. And Equality Utah is there partnering with the ACLU. That was another organization that I should have included. And many of these groups partner together too. Utah Physicians for Healthy Environment works with O2 and the, for air quality. And even Mormon Women for an Ethical Government has been there fighting for climate justice and all this. In fact, believe it or not, Mormon Women for an Ethical Government joined the League of Women Voters in filing the lawsuit against the congressional districts that were so badly gerrymandered. So I am optimistic, and I know I told you about the bills that we dealt with, but I am optimistic that the trend is moving in the right direction. This election, I know every person who's seeking office says this election is really going to be an important one. I believe this election is absolutely going to be one of the most important elections that we have imaginable. Not so much for our state, which who knows, we could get some surprises, but I think that the minority party has been effective in modulating some of these bills. It may not seem that way, but there's a lot of things that does happen behind the scenes that changes things. But the legislature as a group has really shifted quite a bit. And there is a movement to try to pull it back. And there are political action groups in Utah that are devoted to problem-solving legislators who are getting away from all of this messaging nonsense. So don't give up. But the timeline, I agree with you. It strikes me, it's too short for me. But I believe that we can lay that groundwork and certainly change the representation in Weber County with your help. Yes.
Our national representation, for instance, Mike Lee, who has so far some songs he's given a recent to like how much of our national representation affects our local policy? Like, do those guys like are very out of touch national reps have a lot of influence in the state capital? Or is it just
No, for the most part, they don't. All of the representatives from the federal delegation come and visit with us. And both the minority and the majority caucus get visits from everyone. I was so saddened with our visit with Mitt Romney, Senator Romney, this last time, because he conveyed his incredible disappointment with the behavior of the Utah federal delegation. Now, the hundreds of millions of dollars of the infrastructure bill that's coming to Utah is coming despite the fact that Senator Romney was the only person who voted for it. Every time at the state legislature, we wear blue and yellow and wave Ukrainian flags. I remind my colleagues that nobody is voting for aid to Ukraine. And so for the most part, they don't. And in fact, ironically, the state legislature this time had a resolution. This was another really great no vote of mine. That the state did not have to pay any attention to a federal law that they disagreed with. Now, I know that was quite the no vote, but here's the problem. Look at what's happening in Texas. And so, you know, this is where I am so excited with every group that is saying, this is not who we are. And this is not how the United States of America behaves. Every group cumulatively is going to do this. We need to take from the lessons that John Lewis did, fighting a fight that lasted for, you know, more than almost 100 years after the end of the Civil War it took. Now that's a long timeline. I think we're not going to be patient enough for that. So long answer to that, but the federal delegation doesn't really impact us that much, except for when they pass stupid bills. Anything from our online visitors? Great. The other, I do want to share good news. This is Sunday after all, the day for good news. We were able, you know, in my past 2 years in the in the last 2 years, we have been able to secure funding for getting the Seeger Clinic into the space very close to you, so that the Seeger Clinic can continue to operate an amazing program for individuals who do not have health coverage in another way. So that was a way that I was able to persuade the state to invest in Ogden. And similarly, this year we were able to get $700,000 for United Way of Northern Utah to launch a program to amplify small nonprofits to allow them to do their work more efficiently and effectively. And so in those, even though we have spoken about the demands and the needs and the need for call to action, I also want to acknowledge that there are some ways that we can affect change that is going to directly benefit our community. And for that, I am very grateful and look forward to seeing that come and be good, something good for us. So. Great. And I have cards that if you choose to connect with me locally, I am happy to connect with you. When Dylan mentioned that I am the only Democrat in the legislature outside of Salt Lake County, I wanted to share with you how daunting those numbers are. There are 2 million Utahns that live outside of Salt Lake County. To have one Democratic representative seems a little out of balance in my mind. So Stacy Bernal and Angela Chaburka are trying to move the needle along with me and helping them in, and I hope that you'll have a chance to meet them, but helping them in their campaign will be very helpful. But one of the other reasons that I mentioned 2 million Utahns living outside of Salt Lake County is I have taken that upon myself to be the representative for all the people whose representative doesn't answer their email and doesn't acknowledge their concerns. And so I have my email inbox that says, or my email outbox that's labeled answered email to non-constituents is massive, because I really believe that I need to represent all those who don't have a voice right now. So thank you very much. And I will continue to do my best to continue to be your voice. Thanks.
At this time, I invite you to sit in a few moments of stillness, reflection, and prayer. Our prayer today is for the meaning of democracy. These are the words of Lucas Hergert. We are democracy, unruly, unfinished, unrelenting people of rebellious joy, taking to the streets, underground resilience, resisting complacence, the pleasure of activism, organizing into simple hope. We are democracy, people of principles taking on principalities, witnessing the worth of those called unworthy, justice just now gaining ground, integrity of interdependent existence, extending living democracy in heads, hands, hearts. We know that democracy can die, ossify, brittle byproducts of bygone idealists, plotting politicians, pirating votes, corporations cannibalizing our care for the world. Look, it can wither, distend, come to an end. Democracy. Today, we will love you alive, make you ours, make you thrive, and vote as though our hope is on the line. May we be courageous and loving. We continue our collective prayer by coming forward to engage in our weekly ritual that helps us to collectively hold the challenges and joys of being human. As you light a candle, let it hold your hopes, memories, and gratitudes for this beautiful, complicated world and for our lives. And as you drop a stone in our sacred gathering waters, may it also be an opportunity to imagine those burdens and quests for forgiveness held in a community that will let the stone land with care and intention. Please come forward. We are grateful to be in a community where we can share resources to live out our vision in the world. Our offering each Sunday is a testament to the value of this community and our lived values. Now please join in calling for the offering. Do we really need two anymore? Please rise in body or voice and facing the center aisle, sing together the offering song printed in your order of service.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
Thank you for giving. This offering helps this church, helps us in our effort to improve the world in big ways and small. After the service today, you're invited to grab your coffee or tea and join us in the library for our Roots of Unitarian Universalism gathering. This class is meant for anyone interested in learning more about our UU history or as a refresher, and all are welcome. Are there any other announcements? Okay. Oh yeah, cookies. Our Girl Scout troop is still desperately trying to sell some cookies. As Debbie has said, and as a 20-year Girl Scout myself, I know they freeze well. I always say, don't buy the cookies. Make a fabulous donation to the Girl Scouts of Utah. And in return, they will kindly give you some cookies. And you can even just give them the money and let them do what they will with the cookies. I know my troop gave to a fire station one year and took to the children's hospital one year. So if you're like, oh, I would, but I just don't want cookies, don't take the cookies, just give them the money. So
I got one of the cookies last week, and I will say I recommend it.
yeah, there's nothing wrong with the cookies, but I mean, we would have people say, oh, I can't eat cookies, then don't eat the cookies, just give them the money. All right. Let's see. We have a song.
Number 118, this little light of mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
my efforts at meditation when I have to see a break of light. That song just comes into my head as the light is swelling through my body, and it's like, no, don't think the song. Okay, as our service comes to an end, join me in saying the chalice extinguishing words in your order of service. We extinguish this chalice. The light of truth, nor the energy of action. In closing, we offer words of inspiration from Robert Kaufman. We have come together to share our deepest concerns, speaking and singing words of inspiration and hope. We have committed ourselves to do what we can to ease the burdens of those who suffer, to stand for decency and compassion. We have pledged to work for a more wholesome environment for us and for the generations that will follow. But these are just words. The hymns we sing are just songs. All our reflections are just idle thoughts. When we convert them into loving and responsible action throughout the week, then and only then will this morning become what we want it to be, a time of worship.